Morning, church. I'm still missing you. Hey, parents and teens. I miss you. Cannot wait till we get back together. But for now, I want to try to give you guys some things that might be able to help you connect to each other and your families, and also to the other families as we all seek to strive after growing in our faiths in our own separate homes together. I was at Giant Eagle the other day and just happened to be looking on my phone as I was waiting in line and saw a news report of what's going on in New York. And it was in that report that it showed that there were, I think, roughly 700 more deaths in one day in New York, which was pretty alarming. And honestly, I kind of felt a little overwhelmed and a little overcome by some fear in that moment as I see the veracity of this virus, and a gentle whisper, I think, came into my ear from the Spirit of "Do not be afraid." And time again, God told His people not to be afraid. When the Israelites were getting ready to go into the Promised Land and take things over, after they had been afraid to begin with, and God made them wander in the desert for 40 years, the first thing He tells Joshua as he gets ready to take charge of Israel is to take courage and to not be afraid, to be strong and courageous. The apostles, when they were in the boat and the storm was getting crazy around them and they see Jesus walking out toward them, except for they thought it was a ghost, well, He tells them not to be afraid. And another time when the storm is raging and they're on the boat and Jesus is taking a nap, they are scared that they're going to die, and the disciples go and wake Jesus up, and Jesus says, "Why are you so afraid?" I mean, there's no doubt that this virus is concerning and that we need to take necessary precautions to make sure that we are safe during this time. But I don't think we need to let fear reign and rule in our hearts. After all, what can happen to us for those of us who belong to Jesus? Paul said to live is Christ for him, and to die is gain. And we serve the same Savior and should have the same outlook. How nice it is that time and time again God reminds us through His Word to not be afraid. But we need to continually remind ourselves of that fact. I think that's why when Israel was first kind of brought in as a nation and God was setting down the groundwork and giving them the 10 Commandments, that in Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 through 9, the words of "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," that He commands all of this and tells the people that they need to make sure that they constantly are talking about this God to their children, to each other, about what He has done for them and what He is doing for them and will continue to do for them. And I think the call for us as parents is to do that for our children, to constantly tell them, as it says in Deuteronomy, when you get up and when you lie down and as you're walking along the road, just every moment of your life should be spent telling about this God and what He has done. That should remind us not to be afraid. And so, parents, my hope for you, my hope for myself, even with Logan, just at 2 years old, is to find ways to tell our children about these things, about this God who promises us that we don't have to be afraid. On Sunday morning class, we had been going through the book of Ephesians, and we had started the year off with a theme of being rooted in Christ. And in Ephesians chapter 3, towards the end of the chapter, we find this idea that we should be rooted in God's love. And this idea of being rooted, when you plant things, as I found out trying to put this fence in with these root systems that were growing in, they're pretty strong, especially when they continually grow down deeper and deeper into the roots, and when they grow together with other roots from other plants or other trees. And the desires for us as God's people, especially us as teens and as parents at the Louisville Church of Christ, for our roots to grow down deep into God and into Jesus, and then to connect with each other in those strong ways. And so my hope is that I can give you some resources to talk about these things with your teens as a family, and to go through the book of Ephesians. I'm going to kind of recap the first 3 chapters. We had just started in chapter 4 before this whole thing hit, and we had to cancel services. But I want you guys to start at the beginning of chapter 4. But like I said, I want to recap just a little bit of what chapters 1, 2, and 3 are all about. And then I'm going to give you guys some things, some questions that you as families can discuss and go through together. In the first 3 chapters of Ephesians, Paul is sort of laying down this groundwork for his defense of what he desires the church in Ephesus, and us by proxy, to do as followers of Christ. That's kind of what he's desiring to do. And then in chapter 4, he's going to get into what his desires are for us. And in chapter 1, Paul reminds us of how incredibly blessed we and all of creation are because of what Christ has done. He speaks of this inheritance that is ours because he has made us a part of God's family. And Paul reminds them, Paul then actually has a prayer at the end of this chapter of how thankful he is and how thankful we should be because of the awesome gifts that we have, because of this inheritance that's ours. And in chapter 2, Paul tells us that God no longer just has the nation of Israel as his people, but that he's called all people to be his, and that we should live in deep unity to each other because of what Christ has done. It talks about the fact that how Israel was God's people, and that we as Gentiles, we as not Israelites, we were lost and we were without hope and without any mercy in the world, but yet God, through Jesus and his mercy, made us alive, made us a part of this family. And for that reason, we should grow and be connected to each other to be a place for God to live in the Spirit. And in chapter 3, Paul reveals that he was given this ministry by God. This ministry to tell both Jews and Gentiles that salvation from God is for everyone. That it's not just for the Israelites. And that God has made us his church. And that his church exists for God's glory. And so that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. And that's what it says right there. Paul tells us that the church, one of its main jobs is that through us, God's wisdom, all of his wisdom, might be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. Church, if that's true, then we have a huge role to play in this universe. And some of that starts with just being in our families and making God's wisdom known to each other. It's because of these facts and these things that Paul urges us to live differently in chapter 4. And so, looking at just the first 6 verses of chapter 4, families, I want you to discuss a few things. I want to read this to you, and surely you guys, it would be beneficial to take this and read it together as well. But this is what Paul tells us. Therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, in all, and living through all. Now Paul is writing this book while he's actually in house arrest. Now, we might actually feel kind of like we're on house arrest right now ourselves because of the stay-at-home order that's taking place. Surely the stay-at-home order that Paul had probably would have been a little more severe than ours, so we can get out at least and get some groceries. But I could only imagine Paul writing this in house arrest, what his heart was like. There are things that Paul, while he is on house arrest, while he is stuck in his home, he is begging and urging the church to live like. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is he begging us to live like? Now, I know you all have, your teens are all perfect, right? I mean, they've never begged for a single thing in their lives. You guys get this. You guys know what it's like for somebody to beg you for something. And this is a matter of God. This is a matter of Christ and the church. And so these are very important things, just as Paul was talking about in the first 3 chapters. And so things that he begs us to do to live lives that are worthy of the calling of Christ that we've all been called to, there are some things that he highlights that I think we all need to evaluate in ourselves and in our hearts. Some of the things that he begs us to do is to always be humble, always be gentle, and to always be patient with one another, even those in our own household, making allowance for each other's faults, and that we should make every effort to remain united, to being a committed part of the church, especially by using peace. So these are the things I want you and your own households to chat about. And I have 3 questions that I want you to take with you and to chat about as a family. And I want you to do this at least 3 separate times this week. And looking at Deuteronomy 6, 4-9 with this idea of talking about these things when you lie down, when you get up, when you are eating a meal together, when you're walking along the road, as Deuteronomy says. I want you guys to take 3 separate times this week. One time during breakfast, one time while maybe you guys just find a random break in the day, or maybe you want to go for a ride together as a family in the car, or maybe you want to take a walk around the neighborhood. And then the 3rd time is around the dinner table. So 3 separate times: breakfast, a random break in the day, a walk around the neighborhood, or a drive in the car, and then 3rd, around the dinner table. And these are the 3 questions that I want you guys to talk about and discuss. In what areas of your life, personally, might Paul beg you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling of Christ? So in what areas of your life as an individual might Paul be begging you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling of Christ? Second question is, in what ways can your family as a whole walk in a manner worthy of the calling of Christ? And finally, when this virus is all done and we can begin meeting with the church again, which I cannot wait for, what kind of things do you think Paul might beg our church at Louisville to do or be? What kind of ways do you think we as a church can begin to walk more in a manner worthy of the calling of Christ? I want you guys to take time to sit with these questions, to discuss them as a family. My hope and desire is that through these moments of being stuck in our homes, of not having the activities and the things that we had in the past when things were quote unquote normal, that you might find a deeper faith within your own hearts as individuals and as families. And that when we get back together, Christ might do amazing things through a committed, united group who loves him deeply because of what he's done for them. Families, I love you. I miss you. Cannot wait for us to get together. But for now, my prayer and hope is that these can be uplifting moments, encouraging moments for you and your family, that you might grow closer to the one who promises you that you don't have to be afraid. Love you all. God bless, and bye.